Right, so you don't need to sink a ship to scuttle an empire. Sometimes all it takes is hitting the dock. Just 12 days, Iran didn't storm Israeli territory or unleash an army, simply aimed its missiles at the heart of Israel's economic hopes and dreams, which, foremost amongst those looking forward to their future, happened to be the port of Haifa. Tehran turned a bustling port into a smoking liability as a result of Israel's unprovoked attack on them, and with it might have sent Israel's dreams of becoming the Mediterranean keystone of global trade spiralling into the sea. Where we observed strikes on Israel's main oil refinery and thought that was a costly blow to Israel, real economic damage, arguably the biggest blow Iran delivered to Israel of all, was one that wasn't immediately obvious. Hitting Haifa wasn't just a counterstrike, it was a cold recalculation of power, one that left Israel scrambling to count its losses, allies reconsidering their routes, and rivals lining up to inherit the spoils. Iran's recent strikes on Haifa marked more than just a military response to provocation. It's turned out to be a devastating geopolitical maneuver with far-reaching consequences, really bad ones for Israel. Iran inflicted not just a conventional military defeat, but a strategic blow that undermined Israel's economic vision and severed its global connectivity aspirations. By deliberately targeting Haifa, Israel's most important maritime artery and the designated gateway for the ambitious India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, Iran has likely turned an Israeli economic dream into dust and exposed the fragility of Israel's grand ambitions, having to compete against the ambitions of Benjamin Netanyahu. Right, so the conflict between Israel and Iran, as we know by now, began with Israel's own miscalculated aggression, let's put it. In what was an unprovoked assault on Iran, Israel struck Iranian military installations and nuclear-related infrastructure, hoping to preemptively sabotage Iran's capabilities. But the retaliation it provoked from Tehran was not of the crude scattershot variety at all, grossly underestimated as the Iranians were. Instead, Iran responded with a surgical strike strategy, hitting not just military targets but critical infrastructure that formed part of Israel's economic connectivity agenda as well. Iran's targeting of Haifa wasn't just punitive, it had a significant knock-on effect, you see. What it has done is fracture Israel's credibility, isolate it economically, and destroy its ability to present itself as a stable logistical partner to other nations, namely India, various Gulf states, and Europe. You see, when Iranian missiles struck the Bayzan oil refinery, producer of all of Israel's diesel and a significant portion of its petrol, causing massive explosions and fires, along with other strikes across the port, Haifa was no longer seen as safe. Power stations servicing the port were disabled, plunging the surrounding area into darkness and disrupting cargo operations. Key shipping infrastructure, including loading cranes, container storage and customs facilities, were either obliterated or rendered inoperative. Many ships on their way to Haifa turned away and went elsewhere. These strikes, therefore, turned Haifa into a high-risk port in the eyes of global insurers and shipping magnates, and the ramifications were immediate. Commercial vessels were rerouted, insurance premiums went up, and shipping volumes plummeted. A port once envisioned as a Mediterranean linchpin became synonymous with logistical uncertainty. The images of smouldering refineries and abandoned cargo yards drove home a powerful message. Israel was no longer a safe or strategic choice for trade. All of this bad enough in and of itself, you might be thinking. You might also be playing the world's smallest violin at this news too. But it gets a lot worse for Israel yet. You see, at the heart of Israel's strategic economic vision was the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, quite a mouthful, thankfully abbreviated to IMEC, a US and India-backed initiative unveiled during the 2023 G20 summit in New Delhi. IMEC was conceived as a multimodal transportation network designed to enhance economic integration between South Asia, the Gulf, and Europe, whilst providing a counterweight to China's expansive Belt and Road initiative. The project aimed to connect Indian ports on the western coast to the UAE and Saudi Arabia via sea routes, and from there continue overland via rail through Jordan and Israel to European ports on the Mediterranean, particularly Greece and Italy. This route promised to cut freight times significantly compared to the traditional shipping path through the Suez Canal, and offered a more politically stable, Western-aligned corridor for trade. IMEC was more than just a trade route, it was a strategic realignment of regional alliances and economic interests. It sought to foster new logistical partnerships and infrastructure investments, reduce transport costs, and boost energy, digital, and telecommunications integration across continents. For Israel, the corridor represented an opportunity to become the central node bridging east and west, elevating its geopolitical stature even more and embedding it deeply into the economic lifelines of two of the world's largest economies, being India and the European Union. Central to this grand design, though, was the port of Haifa. Its geographic location on the Mediterranean coast made it an ideal endpoint for cargo shipped from India to the Gulf, then transported overland from Jordan and into Israel. From Haifa, goods could be quickly reloaded onto ships and dispatched to European ports, bypassing the congested and increasingly risky Suez Canal. Indian conglomerate Adani Group, with close ties to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government, had already invested in modernising the port, anticipating it would become the crown jewel of this vast infrastructure corridor. The United States and European stakeholders viewed the IMEC plan as a means to both deepen strategic cooperation with Israel and provide a new alternative to Chinese-dominated infrastructure routes. But Iran's missile strike on Haifa destroyed more than just infrastructure. It has completely obliterated the viability of this vision, possibly. It's a massive blow to Israel, and it's barely had any media coverage of this. In one calculated offensive that Israel had brought on itself, Tehran shattered Israel's bid for economic centrality between East and West and all of the economic prosperity that likely would have come with it. Investor confidence has vanished. The dream of Israel as the bridge between Asia and Europe now seemingly lies buried under the rubble of the Baysan refinery. The numbers speak for themselves. According to reports, Israel's losses from its conflict with Iran have exceeded $20 billion, both in terms of offensive costs and infrastructure damage. The longer-term damage is far worse, and analysts since have estimated that Israel stands to lose between $10 and $20 billion annually in missed transit revenue going forwards if it ends up excluded now from IMEC. The Bank of Israel's projection of $400 billion in cumulative war-related losses over the next decade now seems alarmingly plausible. The strategic plan to rebrand Israel as a global trade hub has unravelled somewhat. What remains is an economically wounded nation, diplomatically cornered and strategically sidelined. And that's without conceiving any sort of BDS-related blowback to this as well. If Haifa was the heart of Israel's economic ambition, the destruction wrought on it has severely hampered any hopes of economic recovery. So who could benefit from Israel's loss if their IMEC dreams end up being well and truly over? Amongst the chief beneficiaries of Israel's downfall could be Turkey. Its government has been long promoting its well-developed ports at Mersin and Iskenderun as viable and safer alternatives for IMEC. President Erdogan put out by the plans going via Haifa, cutting Turkey out of the equation as that does. Unlike Haifa, though, Turkish ports are integrated into a vast rail network already that links the Middle East with Europe via the Balkan corridor. This logistical readiness has allowed Turkey to present itself as the natural substitute in the Mediterranean leg of IMEC, but cutting the Gulf states out by going via Iraq and through Turkey likely loses India some Gulf state investment. But if Israel is no longer an option, surely that ends up being a moot point also. Iran itself could actually stand to benefit here. With the IMEC vision now in tatters, Tehran has accelerated the development of its Chabahar port and the International North-South Transport Corridor, the INSTC. This project aims to connect India to Russia and Europe through Iran, bypassing traditional Western-aligned routes entirely. With Haifa discredited, perhaps, INSTC may now be a more viable option for consideration for this too. But Europe would end up having to accept Iran as part of the route that way, and, well, you just can't see that happening, can you? Syria has long been dismissed as logistically dead due to its civil war. They're witnessing some renewed interest from Gulf states, and they have ports like Latakia and Tartus, which could be reconsidered for their strategic value, especially now that Israeli-controlled routes are viewed as high risk. Economic diplomacy is replacing military engagement as Syria attempts to rehabilitate its trade infrastructure, though with the new Syrian regime so pro-Israel as they are, taking advantage of something that wouldn't be in Israel's interests, in fact going completely contrary to them. Well, you can imagine al-Jilani turning his nose up at it. Israel must come first, after all. Even Egypt possibly finds itself in a position of advantage here. The Suez Canal, once feared obsolete by IMEC proponents, is now receiving renewed attention as the fallback artery for east-west trade that it's been for so long already. Though Houthis in Yemen complicate Red Sea navigation a little, possibly, for Israel at any rate, their presence also indirectly enhances Iran's influence over these waters, further isolating Israel on top of everything I've already spoken about. The IMEC project has been more than just an infrastructure proposal. It embodied trilateral cooperation between India, the United States and Israel. It was marketed as a counterweight to China's growing influence, and a way to solidify Western alliances in the Middle East. That illusion now appears to have been well and truly shattered. As noted by the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, though, IMEC's reliance on Israeli infrastructure was always going to be its Achilles heel. Now that heel has been broken, so the entire strategic calculation is having to be reworked, perhaps, and Israel may no longer feature prominently in it at all. Haifa's fall, therefore, was not just a port lost, it was a posture collapsed. Israel, long perceived as a high-tech powerhouse and militarily dominant, has been exposed as economically fragile and strategically replaceable. The startup nation, once confident in its rise to corridor nation status, might now find itself cut off from the future it very much tried to engineer. Iran's victory, therefore, wasn't just about missiles, it was about exclusion. By disabling Haifa, Iran may have now denied Israel a prominent economic position within 21st century trade. Israel would not only have lost billions in potential earnings, but will have lost its credibility as a reliable, safe partner for global logistics. This crisis gives rise to several pressing strategic questions there. First, can Israel realistically recover its shattered reputation as a trade hub, or would its exclusion from IMEC close that door for the foreseeable future? Second, was the original decision to make IMEC reliant on Israeli infrastructure anyway a fatal strategic misstep by others, especially considering the volatility of the region even before Iran due to the conflict with Hamas and other war fronts Benjamin Netanyahu had opened up, such as with Lebanon or Syria? And third, does Iran's success in disabling a key economic node signal the dawn of economic warfare as the region's dominant mode of conflict now, one that seemingly does far more damage than conventional military superiority? There's also the looming question of whether this event marks the consolidation of a broader anti-Zionist economic axis comprising of Iran, Turkey and other nations seeking to isolate Israel completely. What implications does this have for Israel's future economic investment environment then, especially as it reels from broader economic devastation caused by its protracted war in Gaza and the escalated regional conflict, and with Benjamin Netanyahu apparently courting the idea of striking Iran yet again? Israel's economy must suffer more and more just to keep him out of prison and in power, it seems. Haifa, instead of symbolizing Israel's economic renaissance, now stands as a burned-out testament to its hubris, or that of Netanyahu anyway. Iran didn't need to win a war in the conventional sense, it just needed to break a supply chain, it seems. And in doing so, it may have caused Israel far more damage than any of its missiles did. In the aftermath, Israel must now confront an uncomfortable truth, therefore. Its enemies have shown it to be vulnerable not just to rockets, but to relevance too. And whilst ports can be rebuilt, reputations, especially in global trade, are far harder to reconstruct. Haifa's fall, if we might call it that, marks a new era of warfare, where missiles target not just cities, but futures. And Israel, for all its claimed military might, has found itself outmaneuvered not so much on the battlefield, or perhaps more brutally in the corridors of commerce. For more on Netanyahu's plans to restart conflict with Iran and end yet another ceasefire, because that is Israel under his premiership all over, get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next one. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.